Okay, thank you everyone for coming today to the presentation on Manet and Degas by Elana Kaplan. Hopefully I got that pronunciation correctly on Manet Degas. Elana is the museum educator and lecturer for New York City's Metropolitan Museum of Art. I'm sure many of you know her because she's delivered many excellent presentations on various artists in the past. And as always, we are extremely grateful to have her here. And with that, Elana, I will hand it off to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Daniel, for stepping in. And it's great to be back. So this is part 2 of our series. But if you weren't here for part 1 or weren't able to watch the recording, don't worry, because they're independent. You didn't have to come to part 1 to be at part 2. But what I will do is, I know for our last lecture, there was a little technical difficulty with the video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the video I had wanted to play last time, but wasn't working. Again, just the first minute and a half of it, because it is available online for anyone to watch the rest of it. But by playing the video, it'll be an introduction to anyone who missed the first part, a little bit about the exhibit, a little bit about the relationship between Manet and Degas. And also, I think it's really important that everyone see the space that the exhibit was in. The exhibit did close at the end of January. But this way you'll get to see what the paintings look like in their space, how the exhibit was set up. And then when we go to the PowerPoint, it'll, just have allowed you to see what the exhibit looked like, as opposed to just seeing the PowerPoint images where they're kind of isolated. So we're going to start with the video, and then we'll go to my PowerPoint. One second. Okay. Okay, so this is what the exhibit looked like. This was the entrance to the exhibit. And for those who were here last week, you saw we looked at these paintings and you saw some of this. So we'll just go into the exhibit, hear the curators talk for a little bit, and get a sense of the space.
Manet Degas is an exploration of an artistic dialogue between two artists who are each at the forefront of inventing modernism, and who did so largely in response to one another. It's also an attempt to look at a complex relationship through two bodies of work.
Rivalry often reflects ambition. We are all creatures of our time and of our moment, but we all express and respond to that in such different ways. To put this, say, in musical terms, Manet is the great composer of symphonies, and Degas is the great composer of chamber music, one who looks at the intimate complications of modern life.
One of the primary motivations was to bring together two collections that are exceptionally rich in the work of these two artists, that of the Musée d'Orsay and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Manet and Degas have each received frequent monographic treatment, and so the question was, what happens when we look at them in light of each other?
The opportunity here to truly discover the work of one artist through the work of another is really what reveals the essential qualities of each. It's wonderful to have this anchor of each artist at the portal into the exhibition.
Okay, so hopefully that gave you an idea of what the space looked like, and also how this exhibit is really exploring how these two artists influence each other, how they worked with each other, how they were, as he said, friends, rivals, and sometimes antagonists, which we also talked about last week. And a number of the images that you saw in the video we'll be looking at together in the PowerPoint and exploring more in detail. Okay, so now we're going to go to our PowerPoint. Okay, so here were the two portraits that you saw, and the entranceway to the exhibit, and we talked about these portraits last time. So we're looking on the left at Edward Manet and on the right at Edgar Degas. The exhibit, as you might have noticed in the video, it was set up thematically. So last week we explored a couple of themes. We talked about portraits, we talked about their friendship, and some of the paintings that they made in response to other artists. And today we're going to be talking about different themes. The first theme we're going to start with is challenging genres at the Salon. And to look at that theme, we'll be looking here at this painting by Degas. I'll just give you a little bit of a background so you know what painting we're looking at as I talk about the theme. This is called Scene of War in the Middle Ages by Degas. But first I'm going to talk about the theme of the next few paintings, which is challenging genres at the Salon. So in the 1860s, the essential proving ground and public stage for emerging artists was the Salon. And what was the Salon? It was the official juried exhibition of paintings, sculptures, and works on paper held by the Académie des Beaux-Arts in France. Before a robust system of commercial galleries developed, the Salon was the main forum for attracting the attention of critics and collectors, as we'll talk about. It also facilitated government patronage through purchases and awards. So there was a hierarchy of categories or genres. There were set expectations about appropriate subjects and relative scale. And the most cherished, or the pinnacle of the paintings, was monumental history paintings. So we'll keep that in mind. Manet's early Salon submissions boldly transgressed traditional boundaries. So Manet was always kind of pushing the envelope with the paintings that he submitted to the Salon. Degas initially spent years trying to produce an ambitious history painting, but after 1865, when he submitted this painting that we're looking at right now, so this painting is called Scene of War in the Middle Ages. So he gave this painting into the Salon in 1865, but it went unnoticed at the Salon. At the same Salon in 1865, Manet presented a painting called Olympia, and it caused quite a sensation. We'll be looking at that painting in a few minutes. So you'll see that both artists were often submitting their paintings to the Salon, and some were getting more attention than others. Now, Manet remained loyal to the Salon throughout his life, submitting works every single year. When he was faced with rejection, he sought alternate venues, and he would display his paintings in private galleries, in shop windows, and in his studio. Degas, on the other hand, exhibited annually at the Salon only until 1870. Then he abandoned it, and he established independent exhibitions with fellow artists who later became known as the Impressionists. Okay, so with this background about the Salon and the two artists' relationship with it, we're looking at this Degas painting called Scene of War in the Middle Ages. It was made around 1865, and it's an oil painting. It's owned by the Musée d'Orsay, and the size of it is 32 inches by 58 inches. So as I had said, Degas made his Salon debut with this painting in 1865, the same year that Manet debuted his painting called Olympia, which we'll see in a few minutes. So although Manet's submission, Olympia, was quite scandalous, this painting went largely unnoticed. It was later actually erroneously called The Misfortunes of the City of Orleans, perhaps referencing the city of New Orleans. This is quite an enigmatic painting, as you may have noticed as you were looking at it, but it's been said that it's supposed to be an allegory of the American Civil War. Degas had a family connection to that conflict. His mother, whose name was Celestine Musson, came from New Orleans, and her family made visits to Paris both before and after the Union forces captured their city in 1862. So although this was quite an ambitious painting, as I said, it's 32 inches by 58 inches, and it's a historical painting, which again was the highest or most treasured paintings that were submitted to the Salon. So although it was quite ambitious, it didn't meet the expectations of the Salon, and Degas subsequently totally abandoned history paintings or historical paintings. Okay, so then the few paintings we're looking at in this subject are all paintings, again, that these artists submitted to the Salon. This is Manet's The Spanish Singer. It was painted in 1860, and it's owned by the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The size of it is 58 inches by 45 inches. So this painting, as you can see, reflects Parisian taste for Spanish art and culture in the mid-19th century. This painting actually was the painting that Manet debuted with at the Salon in 1861. first painting ever submitted. And it garnered his first popular and critical success, and it received an honorable mention from the jury, which was huge. Though the picture was admired as a genuine portrayal of a Spanish musician, Manet did not disguise the fact that it was composed in a studio using props and a model. You might notice that the Spanish singer he's a left-handed singer. He's holding a guitar strung for a right-handed player, and his fingering suggests that he was unfamiliar with this instrument. So that's one of the reasons we know that he was a model and this was staged. Also, his outfit was fashioned from costumes that Manet kept on hand, and several of the accessories that you see in this painting are in other paintings in this exhibit. So this was a stage painting. Okay, our next painting is by Degas. It's a very large painting. It's 59 inches by 8 feet. And it's called Semiramis Building Babylon. It was painted in 1861, the same year as Manet painted the Spanish singer. And this painting is at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. As you heard in the video, most of the 160 works of art in this exhibit came from either the Met or the Musée d'Orsay, with a couple coming from other collections. Okay, so this painting is Degas, another Degas history painting. This one was earlier than the last painting that we looked at. So although Degas' major interests became subjects taken from modern life, as we'll see, his early paintings focused on history, as we saw with the last painting, the allegory to the Civil War. So this painting portrays Semiramis, who was a legendary Assyrian queen and the founder of Babylon, with some people who are with her. Degas actually kept this painting and other works made at this time in his studio, where he showed them to visitors. Manet apparently saw this painting, and he recommended that Degas should exhibit it in public. And he noted, and this is a quote, "It will make for some variety in your work." So that's what Manet said about this Degas work of art. So you can see even in that sentence, you know, the kind of friendship or rivalry that was going on between these two artists. Okay, our next painting was the Olympia painting that I referenced earlier. This is a painting that Manet made between 1863 and 1865. It's called Olympia. It's at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, and the size is 51 inches by 75 inches. And as I had mentioned in the introduction to this topic, this painting was presented at the Salon of 1865, and it generated a lot of outrage among critics and among the public for its very frank representation of a contemporary courtesan, and painted on a very grand scale. So you can imagine that in 1865, this painting would have generated a lot of outrage. People felt that the painting was shown in a manner that is very coarse, and also they felt that the painting is quite flat. So as we're looking at the painting, we can see that we have Olympia here, and she's gazing at the viewer with unabashed directness, very directly looking at us, the viewers. While you see kind of in the background, her maid is bringing flowers. Perhaps she's bringing flowers from a client. So Manet used models for this painting. The woman he used for Olympia, we'll actually see in another one of his paintings. She was a model. Her name is Victorine Murant. He used her in a number of his paintings. Actually, she posed nude in some of his other paintings, but he used her in a number of paintings, and she's Olympia. And then the other model he used, her name is Laura, and she appears in 2 other paintings also by Manet, and Laura here is the maid of Olympia. Now, Laura's presence in this painting alludes to the burgeoning free Black community in Paris at this time in 1865. Okay, and the next painting here is by Degas. This is called A Woman Seated Beside a Vase of Flowers. It was also painted in 1865. And this one is owned by the Met. The size is 29 inches by 36.5 inches. So Degas painted this work in the fall of 1865 after the Salon that he presented his scene of the war in the Middle Ages, which was the first painting we looked at, and Manet's Olympia. So he painted this one after those 2 paintings were presented at the Salon. And this painting, if you look at it, it really, with this painting, Degas was destabilizing traditional categories of paintings. This painting is both a still life and a portrait. So maybe it's both and maybe it's neither. right? So we have the flowers in the middle, which tell us that it looks like a still life. But we also have this figure off to the side, which tells us that it's a portrait. So it's really neither a grand still life nor a portrait. It's a combination of two. So we also see the juxtaposition of the prominent bouquet and this off-center figure. And the figure is actually gazing distractedly to the right. Degas did this on purpose because he's really trying to show us with this his aim of capturing individuals in a kind of casual slice of life view. So it's quite a unique painting. If you remember from last time when we looked at more portraits, and we'll do that again today, usually artists when they did a portrait, they would put the figure in the middle of the painting. Here we have the flowers in the middle of the painting and the woman off to the side. And again, she's also looking off to the side. And generally in portraits, you have the people in the portrait looking directly out at the viewer. So this is quite a unique painting. And again, this painting was really destabilized traditional categories of painting. Okay, our last painting in this topic is done by Manet, and it's called The Dead Toreador, painted around 1864. And this one is at the National Gallery of Art in Washington. The size is 29 7/8 inches by 60 3/8 inches. So this painting actually was originally part of another painting, a larger painting. This was the lower half of a larger composition, which was titled Episode from a Bullfight. And the larger painting, Manet had exhibited at the Salon of 1864. Now, the subject matter reflects, again, the enthusiasm in Paris for Spanish culture, as we talked about with a few of our paintings. But this was not a scene that Manet would have witnessed firsthand because he hadn't yet been to Spain when he did this painting. His first visit to Spain would actually occur the year after he made this painting. He went there first in 1865. Now, when critics saw this painting in the Salon of 1864, they faulted the spatial relationship and the relative scale in the original painting. And because of that criticism, Manet actually cut the canvas in two and displayed this, which was the lower half of the painting, with a new title. And he exhibited it at a solo exhibition in 1867. So you see that Manet really took criticism that he got at the Salon, and he actually, based on that criticism, cut this painting in half and just displayed the lower half at a solo exhibition. Okay, so our next topic we're going to talk about is beyond portraiture. Portraiture was in vogue in France during the mid-19th century, and it occupied an important place in the work of Manet and Degas. For those of you who were here for our last talk, and for those who will watch the recording, we spent a lot of time on family portraiture. So portraiture is very important. Now, neither Manet nor Degas relied on commissions, which freed them to focus primarily on family, friends, and public figures in their portrait paintings. So last time we talked about family portraits, and today we'll look at some of their portraits they did of friends. Both of these artists stretched the definition of portraiture, introducing ambiguities and exploring its narrative possibilities by representing a broad range of people, which we will see today, from members of high society to stage performers and to women on the fringe of respectable society, which we saw in that Olympia painting. Manet imbued his models with a certain stateliness. He presented them full length, as we see here. This is a Manet painting. So he often presented them full length, often in static poses, and magnified their presence by having them directly address the viewer. Degas was equally concerned with the expressive power of bodies and faces. He aimed to convey something of his sitters' characters by depicting them in distinctive, unconventional postures within familiar environments, which we saw with the woman and the flowers. That was very unconventional, and she wasn't looking out at the crowd. So this is a painting by Manet. It's called Young Lady in 1866. It was painted in 1866. By the way, it was seen as a very modern painting when it was painted in 1866. It's owned by the Met, and it's a large painting. It's 72 7/8 inches by 50 5/8 inches. Some of you might recognize the model in this painting. It's the same model that was in Olympia, the redheaded woman, Victorine Meurant. And she had recently posed for him in that brazen painting we saw before when she was in the nude in the Olympia. Here she appears relatively demure, like she looks quite different than she did in the last painting in terms of her expression. But her silk dressing gown and the small bouquet of flowers that she holds to her nose, and you might also see that she has a man's monocle hanging from her neck. All these things may signal a recent romantic encounter. She appears relatively demure here, and she flaunts an intimate silk dressing gown. Now, recent scholars who have been assessing this painting have interpreted it as an allegory of the five senses. So if you look at the kind of interesting objects that are in this painting, why did Manet include these interesting objects? Perhaps they're an allegory to the five senses. So we see that she's holding this small bunch of flowers, and that would refer to the sense of smell. We have an orange here on the bottom, a peeled orange, and that would be the sense of taste. We have her parrot confidant, which would be the sense of hearing. The man's monocle, which might be a little hard to see, but I'm pointing to it. And that would be, because she's touching it, that would refer to the sense of sight and touch. This painting that we're looking here was exhibited at the Salon in 1868. And it may have inspired a sketch by Degas that he did later on, including a parrot. So again, these artists are often painting in similar subject matters and kind of working off of each other. We have another painting here by Manet. It's called The Balcony. It was painted between 1868 and 1869. And this is at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. The size is 66 inches by 49 inches. So in this painting, Manet had his friends model for this very unconventional group portrait. As I said, both Manet and Degas, because they weren't commissioned to do portraits, they were free to use their friends and family in their portraits. Now in this painting, this woman seated over here at the balcony is Berthe Morisot, who herself is a well-known artist. She was an artist, a female artist who worked with the Impressionists. This is Manet's first painting that he included Berthe Morisot. He would go on to paint her 12 times. We will talk about that and see a number of those paintings. So she's here. And then in the painting, we also have friends of Manet, an artist and a violinist. And you might be able to see in the shadowy background, barely visible, is Manet's godson or stepson, Leon, which we saw last week in a number of his paintings. And I talked about he included his stepson in many of his paintings. So we see him here kind of in the shadowy background. Take a minute to look at this painting, and you'll notice that the figures appear frozen and quite detached. And they seem almost trapped behind this balcony railing here. And it's interesting, again, we have three figures standing in very close, or four figures standing in close proximity, but they're not interacting at all. They're not looking at each other. They're not talking to each other. And we'll notice this, keep this in mind, we'll notice this in some other group portraits that we see later on. So they really appear almost frozen and detached in this painting. Now, Morisot actually saw this painting after Manet exhibited it at the Salon of 1869, and she wrote, this is a quote from Berthe Morisot, who's the figure right here. She said, it gave her the impression of some wild fruit, a bit unripe even. She said, I look even more strange than ugly. That's what Berthe Morisot said about herself in this painting. So Manet had met Berthe Morisot in 1867. He was 9 years older than her, and he was married at the time. We'll see in a little while that he will go on to paint 12 paintings of her. And there's a lot of talk about whether they were romantically involved or not. Different art historians have speculated about that. But again, he was 9 years older than her and married when they met. Okay, we'll keep that in mind. We'll see some portraits of her later on, but for now, we're going to go into some other portraits. This is a Degas. Degas did this portrait of James Jacques Tussaud. He painted in between 1867 and 1868, and it's at the Met. The size is 59 5/8 inches by 44 inches. So James Jacques Joseph Tussaud was actually a painter, as you can probably guess from the background in the painting. So he's sitting here in his studio. And James was a friend and mentor of Degas in the 1860s and early 1870s. So here we see him posed in his studio, and he's surrounded by canvases that reflect the wide-ranging taste that he shared with Degas. You'll see all the paintings in the studio, both on his easel and just hanging up. There's a Japanese scene. There are pictures of contemporary leisure, portraits, lots of paintings. And notice the arrangement of this painting, because we'll see a similar arrangement, a similar composition to Manet that we're going to look at next. But here we can see Tussaud seems to be leaning nonchalantly back, and it shows that he and Degas were friendly, that he had his friend pose very kind of nonchalantly and leaning back very comfortably. So that shows that Degas and James were very friendly. Now this is a painting that Manet did. And actually, let's look at them side by side so we can notice the differences between them, between the paintings and the subject matter. So first, I just want to talk a little bit about Manet's painting. So this is a painting that he did of Émile Zola in 1868. It's an oil on canvas, and it is at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. So the one on the right is by Manet, and it's in Paris, and the one on the left is by Degas, and it's at the Met. The dimensions of the one on the right are 57.5 inches by 44 inches. So these two paintings are very similar in size. And as I'm talking about the Manet painting, maybe notice some of the similarities and some of the differences between them. So Manet painted this portrait of the writer and critic Émile Zola, and he did it almost as a thank you, because Émile Zola had recently written something positive about Manet in the press. So as a thank you, Manet wanted to make a painting of him. So again, you'll see, similar to Degas' painting, that in Manet's painting, Émile Zola is surrounded by tools of his trade, we'll say, right? You can see their books, there's a quill pen. Let's look at it on its own so you can really see these things. You can see their books, you can see the quill pen and inkwell. And also, if you see this blue pamphlet on his desk, this is actually the 1867 article that Émile Zola wrote about Manet, praising him. Okay, so it's kind of funny that Manet made a painting as a gift to Émile Zola, but it includes the praise that Zola wrote about Manet in the painting. So Manet is really propping himself up with this. We'll also notice on the top here, this is very interesting. Notice this is a frame collage of prints. And we'll see that both artists do this, where they put a frame collage of prints in their paintings. Here, Manet included, again, another way to prop himself up. I don't know if any of you recognize this photograph here. I see some of you nodding your heads. So this is a photograph of the Olympia painting that we were looking at. So, here Manet makes this painting as a thank you to Émile Zola, and he includes a picture of his own painting in the painting and an article praising himself. Okay, we also see a Japanese woodcut. And we also see a print after Diego Velázquez, who was an artist that very much influenced Manet. So now let's look at these two paintings side by side, and hopefully you notice some differences, some similarities, of course. They're both surrounded by their tools of trade. Both of the artists, both of the sitters are kind of sitting sideways, which is interesting. But you might also notice some differences. And even though they're the same size and painted around the same time, you'll notice that Émile Zola appears much more rigid. He's sitting, much more straight up, much more rigid. And Tussaud, as I said, is sitting much more nonchalant, laid back, more relaxed, which suggests that Degas and Tussaud were much friendlier, and Manet and Zola had more of a, working relationship between them. Now, interesting, based on a question that I got last week, someone asked me last week about Degas and his anti-Semitism, and I had said that a lot of it stemmed from the Dreyfus affair in the 1890s. So interesting, I'm sure many of you know that Émile Zola wrote J'accuse, which was accusing the French government of anti-Semitism against and framing Dreyfus. Now, this painting, as I said, was painted in 1868, which was 30 years before the Dreyfus affair, which happened in 1898. But it's interesting that Manet had a relationship with Émile Zola, and it was someone that Degas ended up really not liking because he supported Dreyfus and Degas did not. So a lot of interesting connections, historical connections between these stories. Okay, now our next painting is by Degas. It's called The Collector of Prints. It was painted in 1866, and it's at the Met. Much smaller painting. This is 20 inches by 15 3/4 inches. And as you're looking at it, see if you notice differences with the last two paintings that we're looking at. So here we have, this is a man who collected prints, and we can see that he's holding a portfolio of prints in between his legs, including botanical illustrations. There's also, you can see a fashionable Tang Dynasty horse, and there's also Japanese fabric swatches and photographs, which are pinned to this board back here. So it really shows the eclectic taste of a contemporary collector. And let's just look at this side by side with Manet's painting. And again, on your own, you can see the similarities and the differences between them. Again, Degas was more familiar with this collector of prints. You can see he presents him a little bit more, he's leaning over, it's a little more casual. But notice in both of these paintings that they have these boards with art pinned to them on the right upper hand side. So again, you see how these artists really knew about each other's work, sometimes worked together, were influenced by it, and often painted in similar ways. Okay, and this is just me in the exhibit and standing next to these two works of art that we saw again, so you can see they're very similar size and how the museum put these paintings side by side. So we could see how the artists really played off of each other. Okay, we're moving on to our next topic, which is called the Morisot Circle. And we're going to talk about this topic with this background painting by Degas. And this is a portrait that Degas did of Manet's brother. So this is Manet's brother, Eugene Manet. Before we talk about the painting, I'm just going to give a little background of our next theme, which is the Morisot Circle, and it's really going to focus on Berthe Morisot. So in the summer of 1868, Manet was introduced to the sisters Berthe and Emma Morisot. They were both painters, and they actually met each other at the Louvre Museum, which is also where Manet and Degas met each other. The Manet and Morisot families soon became very close. They invited each other to their weekly get-togethers, which Degas also attended. And the portraits that Manet and Degas made of the Morisots vividly capture this intimate social circle. So all these artists, Manet, Degas, Berthe Morisot, and other artists were all friendly and in social circles together. Letters between the Morisot family members also give us a lot of information about Manet and Degas' relationship. We don't have a lot of letters between Manet and Degas to each other, so we have to rely on letters that their friends wrote about each other, and that includes letters that the Morisots wrote about the families. Now, as I said, Manet met Berthe Morisot in 1867, and he was 9 years older than her. The first time he painted her was in around 1867, and then in 1874, Berthe Morisot actually married Manet's younger brother. And we'll talk about that a little more. It could be, as I said, some people said there was a romantic relationship between Manet and Berthe Morisot, even though he was married. And it could be that she married his younger brother because she wanted to still be a part of his life, but knew that she could never marry him. Again, it is art historians debate this. You can read a lot about it, but that is one opinion. So we're going to look at some of the paintings that Manet did of her. But before we do this, as I said, this is Degas' painting of Eugene Manet. So that's Edouard Manet's younger brother, and he's the one who actually married Berthe Morisot. So Degas made this painting of him in 1874, which is the year that he married Berthe Morisot. So looking at this painting, it's a small painting. It's 24 inches by 31 inches. And it was, as I said, a wedding gift that Degas gave to Morisot and Eugene Manet. So this is a very unique painting by Degas that some of you might have noticed compared to some of his other paintings. The portrait is very unique in two ways. First of all, the sitter is outside. All the other portraits we've seen so far, and ones that we'll see in a few minutes, all the portraits were done inside. So this is an outdoor portrait. The sitter is outside in a landscape. And also, notice how he's sitting. He's reclined. He's sitting on the ground, very relaxed. Think about the other portraits we were looking at with people in chairs or sitting more formally inside. So this is quite unique. And Degas actually exhibited this work at the Second Impressionist exhibition in 1876. Okay, so now we're going to look at a number of Manet's paintings of Berthe Morisot. This one was done in 1871, and it's his second major painting showing Berthe Morisot after the balcony, which we saw a few paintings ago. This is at the Museum of Art, Rhode Island School of Design, and the size is 59 by 44 inches. So here, she's painted in her studio, and she's in a much more relaxed pose. Now, Interesting, just a background to this, that Bertha Morisot's mom always accompanied her to the sittings. Like when she would sit for Manet for these paintings, her mom always accompanied her, because at that time, in the late 1860s, early 1870s, it wouldn't be appropriate for a single woman to go on her own to a studio to be painted. Now you'll notice that Manet only depicts her in indoor domestic settings. He never shows her as an artist, and she was an accomplished artist. She would go on to exhibit with the Impressionists, but he doesn't show her as an artist at all, not, with her tools of trade. He always shows her in indoor domestic settings. And that's because, of course, at this time, the women of this class were expected to be wives and mothers, and they weren't supposed to have a career, certainly not a career in art. That was much frowned upon. And also, of course, they couldn't be unchaperoned. So, of course, this is all very difficult for Morisot, who became an artist. And perhaps that's another reason why she married Eugene Manet, because she wanted to work as an artist, and it wouldn't have been appropriate for her to be an unmarried, single woman as an artist. Okay, this painting was actually shown at the Salon of 1873, but it was criticized for its lack of finish. Okay, here's another painting that Manet did of Bertha Morisot. And we can look at them side by side here. Okay. This one is, you can see, quite different than the other ones that we were looking at. This is the last painting that Manet did of Bertha Morisot. It's called Mourning, Bertha Morisot in Mourning. The size is 23 by 18 inches. And he did this when she was mourning her father. But again, it's the last portrait that he made. He did 12 portraits of her, and this is the last one that he did. And he painted it actually the same year that she married his brother. So even though he's showing her in mourning for her father, perhaps there's another meaning to the fact that he shows her in mourning, especially if they had some kind of intimate relationship. This painting actually was in Degas' collection. Degas bought this painting. This was in his collection. So we'll just look at them side by side, look at the two different ways that he portrayed her before she married his brother and then after. This one on the left is quite distinctive for a very arresting gaze of the sitter, although she has an arresting gaze, I think, of both of them. Always wearing black in this paintings, which is interesting. Here, she's really very much shown as a fashionable Parisian, right? She's got these violets that she's holding, which is actually a hint of perhaps flirtation. But really notice the differences between these two portraits. This one is almost haunting the one of her mourning. Okay, our next topic is at the race course. So racehorsing, which had arrived in England at the end of the 18th century, became very popular for Parisians at this time. People would go to watch. They liked the thrilling competition, the speed, the diverse crowds, and it appealed to artists who sought to depict scenes of contemporary life, especially Degas. Degas was quick to recognize its modernity, and Degas did a lot of paintings of racehorses and horses and sculptures of horses. It was really a subject that he did a lot. He did his first racehorsing pictures in the early 1860s, and he submitted a large canvas on the subject to the Salon of 1866. Now, we do know that the two artists, Manet and Degas, spent time at the racehorses together. They both painted this subject, so you can see again that they were artists that worked together and often did similar subjects. But Degas did a lot more racehorse paintings than Manet did. So the first painting that we're looking at is this one is done by Manet, and it's called The Races. It was painted in 1872, and it's 28 inches by 37 inches. And again, Manet really owed his interest in the subject to Degas. Degas did a number of drawings of Manet at the races, which we'll see, which tells us that they definitely spent time at the race course together. Now, as I said last time, although Degas depicted Manet in many works of art, Manet did not depict Degas except possibly in one painting, and this is the one. It is possible, we think, that this is Degas in the lower right-hand corner wearing the top hat. That's the only time that Manet ever depicted Degas. in any of his works of art. And we don't know for sure, but we do think that this is Degas. And again, it's from the back, so that's interesting. Okay, this is Degas painting. It's called The False Start. He painted it between 1869 and 1872. This one is at the Yale University Art Gallery, and it's very small. It's 12 inches by 15 inches. And although Degas rarely painted outdoor scenes, beginning in the early 1860s, he got very interested in racetracks and then started painting outdoors. And here he's really showing us this false start. You can see the jockey in the foreground is struggling to restrain his horse so he can return to the starting line. And this was the time that Degas made many models, sculptures of horses in wax. And he was doing it around the time that this painting was made. This is a Degas sketch of Edward Manet at the races. Remember, I had said that Degas painted and sketched Manet many times, including here, and we saw some last week also. And this is at the Met. And so we can see the fact that Degas sketched Manet here, that we know that the two of them spent time at the races together. And we also see in the sketches this loosely sketched woman with field glasses. We're not sure if this was a sketch for a larger work of art or if he was just sketching Manet and this woman when he was at the racehorses. Okay, here's a Degas painting at the race course called Amateur Jockeys. It was painted between 1876 and 1887, and it's at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. The size is 25 inches by 31 inches. So although this painting appears to have been made outdoors on plein air and on the spot, Degas was known to labor over his work in the studio, sometimes for decades. And this one he started in 1876 and finished in 1887. So it took almost 13 years to execute this very ambitious painting that he made. It's ambitious because it's a mixture of a very unusual mixture of a rural landscape and a sporting scene. And those two areas are really separated by this train, which is billowing smoke over here. So it's quite an ambitious portrait. Okay, our next topic is from one war to another. And we'll see that both artists were affected by different wars that were going on during their lifetime. So Manet regularly produced works based on events that touched or outraged him as a citizen, while Degas really shied away from current events in his public work. Early in the artist relationship, the United States was torn apart by the Civil War, and it affected both artists, which we'll talk about. And then, of course, the Franco-Prussian War between 1870 and 1871 drew the two men actually closer together. So the Civil War separated them because they took different sides on that, but the Franco-Prussian War brought them together. During the Franco-Prussian War, most artists fled Paris, but Manet and Degas stayed to defend their city as members of the National Guard. So the visual trace of these conflicts is more subtle in Degas' work, whereas Manet produced some of his boldest prints in response to the conditions of the war and its aftermaths. As I said, the US Civil War also affected both of them. It directly affected Degas' family because I had mentioned earlier, his mother was from New Orleans and he had relatives who supported the Confederacy and continued to make their living from the cotton trade. Degas actually visited New Orleans in 1872, and we'll see a painting that he made during that time period. Now, this painting that we're looking at here is Manet's painting. He did a number of paintings of warships. This is called the Battle of the USS Kearsarge and the CSS Alabama. He painted in 1864. It's at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and the size is 54 inches by 50 3/4 inches. So it's quite a dramatic painting, and it captures the important naval victory of the American Civil War fought off of the coast of France on June 19th, 1864. In this painting, you can see the sinking Confederate boat, which was the CSS Alabama. It's taken a direct hit to her engines from the Union's CSS Kearsarge, which is now off in the distance. It's a little hard to see, but you might see that this painting has a raised American flag, and it's flying kind of against the smoke back there. So and it shows us that Manet had sympathy for the Union. And when he was younger, he wanted to join the Navy. But this painting is his first known seascape and his first painting of a current event. Now, remember that Manet supported the Union and Degas supported the Confederacy. So that was something that they had some conflict about. Manet did another painting. This is called the Kearsarge, or the USS Kearsarge. Apollon in 1864. This is owned by the Met, and the size is 32 inches by 39 inches. So Manet actually went to see the USS Corsage when it was anchored off the coast of France, soon after reading news headlines about its victory over the Confederate naval vessel. That was the painting that we just saw. So the battle between the American ships received a lot of attention in the American press. That's why he made the last painting we looked at. And Manet, here we'll look at them side by side, painted 2 canvases related to the event. One that kind of imagined the battle. This one is how he imagined the conflict. And this one, which shows the surviving ship, that he actually went to see the ship when it was anchored on the coast of France. And these were his first depictions of a current event. Now, this is Degas' painting of a cotton office in New Orleans. Remember, I said he went to New Orleans in 1872. His mother's family was involved in the cotton industry. So he went to visit in 1872, and he made this painting in 1873. The size is 28 inches by 36 inches. So during his trip to New Orleans, he went to visit his family business, and he painted this very lively scene of an office of his family's cotton business. This is quite a detailed painting, really interesting and fun to look at. We just have a few minutes, but something really quite a detailed painting. And he also paints his family members here. His uncle is in the foreground. You can see he's assessing the quality of this cotton, which is quite a valuable commodity. Also, his brothers are in the painting. One of his brothers is here reading the local paper, and his other brother is here leaning casually against the counter. And this brother is kind of watching the employees, making sure that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And of course, we see lots of cotton in here also. Degas' 2 brothers, which are in the painting, were part of the family cotton business. Of course, Degas was not. He was an artist. So he differed than his brothers in what he was involved in. But again, we see how Degas was very more connected to the South and the Confederacy, whereas Manet, where we saw in his last 2 paintings, was sympathetic to the Union cause. Okay, our next topic that we're looking at is Impressionism. And we're looking at a very famous painting by Degas, the dance class. We know that Degas did a lot of paintings of dancers. We're not going to focus on that today because this is the only dance painting in the exhibit. The exhibit's not about Impressionists because it's about the relationship between Manet and Degas. But just so you should know, this is actually a very tiny painting. This is me standing next to the painting. This painting by Degas is only 7 inches by 10 5/8 inches. But we'll look at it as a background for our next topic, which is Impressionism. And beginning in 1874, Degas played a leading role in organizing the independent non-juried shows that became known as the Impressionist exhibitions. And he did that in response to the Salon, where his paintings were often rejected. And in a letter that year in 1874, Degas lamented that Manet refuses to join us in the Impressionists. Although Manet was considered a leader of the movement, he never exhibited among the ranks, and he really preferred to stay loyal to the Salon and to exhibiting his works of art there. Okay, but we're going to look at some of these Impressionist quality work of art. This is Degas' The Dance Class, painted in 1870. It's oil on wood, and it's 7 inches by 10 inches. This was actually Degas' first depiction of a dance class. And he actually had all the dancers come to his studio to pose because he didn't yet have permission to go backstage at the Paris Opera yet. We know that Degas went on to paint many, many paintings of ballerinas. This is Manet's, it's called Marine. It was painted around 1868, and it's actually a watercolor. It's at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, and it's also a tiny painting. It's 4 inches by 8 inches. And Manet probably made the seascape following his summer holiday in 1868. He chose watercolors, which we haven't seen yet. It's our first watercolor painting, to convey the moving currents of the ocean and the breeze, and to show the sailboats. And we can see from this painting that Manet was very interested in the sea. Remember, we saw those Civil War boats. Both artists were interested in the sea, but especially Manet, who I had said originally tried to pursue a career in the French Navy. We'll see a couple more of their beach scenes. This is Degas' beach scene from 1869. It's at the National Gallery in London, and it's also a smaller painting. It's 18 inches by 32 inches. And this was the same summer in 1869 that Degas vacationed on the northern French coast, and he and Manet would often visit each other. And they made paintings, similar paintings of seaside tourists against the backdrop of a blue sea, which is dotted with sailboats and ships. And they both made these paintings hoping that they would sell them. This painting actually was exhibited at the Third Impressionist exhibition in 1877. But even though we have the sailboats and the sea in the distance, it really focuses on this nanny here who's combing the hair of a child. And her swimming suit is, or her swimming costume, as they called it, is laid out on the sand to dry. Manet's painting, kind of similar to that painting and done the same summer, is called On the Beach. This one's at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, and it's also a small painting, 12 inches by 26 inches. This one you might notice is quite an unusually elongated canvas, and it lacks realistic perspective. Notice the sizes of people, the perspective is quite strange. But Manet is really trying to show this new form of outdoor leisure in the 19th century, which is seaside tourism. And he based this scene on it's a fashionably best dressed tourist. And he did sketches by the sea and then made this painting. Here we have a well-known painting. This is done by Manet. It's called the Monet family in the garden. So Manet made this painting of the Monet family in the garden in 1874, and this painting is at the Met. The size is 24 by 39 inches. And during this summer, Manet vacationed at a home that was close to the home of Monet's family. So the two artists often saw each other that summer, and sometimes they painted together outdoors, and sometimes Renoir joined them, and sometimes Degas also joined them. So we see that these artists often socialized together and often painted together. Here Manet did a painting on plein air. He painted it outdoors. But again, Manet refused to join Degas in the Impressionist exhibition. He didn't participate, but he did support the artist and was certainly influenced by then. So again, we see differences between Manet and Degas, where Degas was very involved in the Impressionist exhibition and Manet refused to join. Okay. We have a few more paintings. I know we're running a little bit later, but I'll go through the few more, and hopefully anyone who can stay for questions will stay for questions. So as I had said before, that the two artists had overlapping social networks, which included fellow artists, but also poets, novelists, and journalists. In the 1870s, they would gather regularly at Paris cafes for lively discussion and debate. Manet was the more literary of the two, and he was friendly with a lot more authors. But they had a lot of similar friends. So here we have a Degas painting called Visit to the Museum. It's at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. The size is 36 inches by 26 inches. And this is actually showing us Degas painted Marie Cassatt and her sister Lydia in this painting. Degas was very friendly with Marie Cassatt, as I talked about at our last session, and often included her in her paintings. And we'll see a couple of both paintings and sketches that Degas did of Marie Cassatt and her sister. Here's a sketch that he did of them at the Louvre. This is actually a sketch that he did of them at the Louvre and a painting that he did at the Louvre. Degas was very friendly with Marie Cassatt. They were friends, and they also painted together, and they were fellow Impressionists. And here he's showing a lot of Degas' paintings. He shows working class women, which we'll see working class women as ballet dancers. But here he's showing the Cassatt sisters as more well-to-do women, and both by the way they're dressed and also that they're able to go to the museum and engage in a leisurely activity. We see here he portrayed Marie Cassatt with her back towards the viewer, and her gaze is really on this sarcophagus that she's looking at. Interestingly, Degas never married, and neither did Marie Cassatt or her sister Lydia. And they all spent a lot of time together. Okay, our last topic that we're going to be looking at today is Parisians. We're going to focus on Parisians. And in the second half of the 19th century, cafes, shops, music halls, theaters, and ballets of Paris attracted a lot of artists and writers where diverse crowds would intermingle. So drawing on the spectacle of these popular venues, Manet and Degas depicted working women and performers in their scenes. So we're going to look a little bit at the kind of Parisian lifestyle here. And we're looking here at a Manet painting. It's called At the Milliners in 1881. This is at the Fine Arts Museum in San Francisco. And the size is 33 inches by 29 inches. So there was quite an interest in women's fashion and accessories at the time, both for women and also for artists. You'll see that both Manet and Degas depicted milliners. And here we have a millinery here. We don't know if the woman holding the hat in this painting is the milliner, or maybe she's a customer in the shop. But it shows that hat shops were very important in Paris at the time and in both of these artists' paintings. It's kind of a provocative painting because we see that her shawl is kind of off of her shoulder. We can see her bare shoulder in this painting. So this is Manet's painting of a hat shop, and this is Degas' painting of a hat shop. It's called The Millinery Shop, painted in 1879. This is at the Art Institute in Chicago, and it's 39 inches by 43 inches. So again, Paris at this time period in the 19th century the late 19th century was really the center of the fashion industry. And the millinery trade was no exception. There were, I read, almost 1,000 hat shops in Paris at this time. Tells you the importance of hats at that time, both for men and women. Degas did a lot of paintings with a millinery theme, at least 20. And here we can see, this is a painting that's viewed from above. And we can see this woman who's probably a shop clerk examining this hat. And I don't know if you can see this detail, but she actually has a pin in her mouth, and her lips are kind of around that pin. So this is just two of many paintings that Degas and Manet did of hat shops. The other thing that was very popular in Paris at this time was the opera. So this is Degas painting the orchestra of the opera, painted in 1870, and it's at the Musée d'Orsay. It's 22 inches by 18 inches. And interestingly, Degas does not highlight the ballet, which is being performed on stage, but his focus is really on the orchestra pit below in this painting. And this is Manet's painting. It's called the Café Concert, painted in 1879. It's a small painting, 18 inches by 15 inches, and it shows the popularity of the Parisian Café Concert, which were very casual venues offering musical entertainment. Manet is showing us a crowd. There's a singer on stage, but again, that's really not the focus of the painting, even though we can see her because she's reflected, interesting, in the mirror. That's how we're able to see her. But we're really looking at the diverse mix of people who are at this cafe concert. We have this working class woman to the left who has a cigarette in her hand. We also have a waitress in the middle who's kind of mid-drink. And then we have this upper class man at the right wearing his top hat. Now, despite the very cramped condition, there is no social interaction between these figures at all. They're all looking in different directions. They have nothing to do with each other. And if you remember that balcony painting that I showed you of Bertha Morisot at the beginning, also the figures had no interaction between them. So again, we see this kind of isolation in this painting too. And then we'll end off with the last two paintings were, as some of you might remember, the advertisement for this exhibit. This was the advertisement that people saw all over New York and other places, featuring two of the paintings that we're going to look at now. There's a painting by Manet, this one by Degas. These paintings actually were done in the same cafe, and this is the same woman in both of these paintings. I know she doesn't look similar, but it is the same woman, the same actress in both paintings. Her name was Elana Andre. So we'll just take a minute to look closely at these two paintings. This is a Degas painting. It's called In a Cafe, painting in 1875 to 76. And this one's at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. The size is 36 inches by 26 inches. And again, it was painted in a cafe, the same cafe that Degas often met Manet and other artists in their circle. And he's showing us this couple at a table. But again, look, they're sitting next to each other. They're clearly together, but they have no interaction whatsoever between the two of them. They seem almost indifferent to each other. And it gives us this feeling of modern urban isolation that we saw in our last painting also. So this actress, Ellen, who we'll see in the next painting, is posing for the weary-looking female figure, and she's kind of slumped over, and she has a downturned expression. Compared to this painting by Manet, which is called Plum Brandy, painted in 1877, the year after Degas. So again, you see these artists were constantly responding to each other. This is at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and it's 29 inches by 19 3/4 inches. Manet made this painting based on Degas' painting. It's the same setting, as I said, the same cafe, the same model, the actress. Now here, she's alone, as you see, she's alone with her drink. And her identity seems kind of ambiguous in this painting. She's resting her head in her hand. She's kind of ignoring the drink that she has in front of her, and she's got an unlit cigarette in her hand, and she's kind of gazing wistfully into the distance, which again conveys this feeling of urban isolation, very similar to the Degas painting that we were just looking, both paintings showing us this urban isolation. Okay, so we're going to end here because I know we ran a few minutes over, but if anyone wants to stay with any questions or comments, I can definitely stay. I just want to thank everyone for coming for the second part of our talk.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I will read off, we had something in the chat. If anyone wants to ask a question, please feel free to hit the reactions tab at the bottom and, raise your hand, and I'll call on you, or you can put a question in the chat. But someone put in there, is there a listing of the paintings you have covered today that we can download and make, or, and download?
Okay, so I have all the paintings. So I just put my email in the chat. So if you want a list of them, I'm happy to email you that list of the paintings. Just send me an email and remind me, and I will send that to you.
Okay, thank you. Alan, Alan, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
I want to ask Elana the question about the first painting she showed about the Middle Ages, but she said it was really a Civil War allegorical painting. Is that to show the women that are being assaulted in some cases? Is the South and the soldiers are the North? Is that your understanding of what Degas was trying to represent there?
So Degas didn't like explain how he was referencing it as an allegory to the Civil War. So some people have written that, but that's, art historians' interpretation. We don't have any kind of like key of what Degas felt on that subject. Also, we know that he was sympathetic to the Confederacy, so that would make sense, but he wasn't always so public about it, of course, because it wasn't always such a popular position to take, especially in his connection to Manet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I had a quick question too. So did you say that Degas was the one that supported the South and was anti-Dreyfus, and that Manet was on the opposite side of the social justice?
Okay, so Manet definitely supported the North. Manet actually passed away before the whole Dreyfus affair. Like he died before that. So we don't know. He died in 1883. Degas died in 1917. It's not 1917. He was around for the whole Dreyfus affair, and he took the side of against Dreyfus. So we don't know about Manet, but we do know that he was, had the connection to Emile Zola from Emile Zola writing about him.
Okay, very cool. Okay, anybody, any more questions? Okay, well, yeah, thank you very much. And I would like to let everyone know, you said something about impressionism. I don't know, is that on the calendar next, or is, I know you had one presentation on Exodus, right?
Yes, that's for April, a pre-Passover talk on ancient Egyptian art.
Okay, yes, and that is on April 18th at 10 a.m. So I encourage everyone to sign up for that. I'm sure it will be another excellent presentation. And thank you very much. That was excellent.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for coming and staying on.
Thank you for your time.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.